Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Can you provide for the record a copy of the recusal agreement that you signed when you were at the New York Fed?
I did not sign a recusal agreement. I withdrew from day-to-day management operations policies of the New York Fed, and my colleagues, both in Washington and in New York, can attest to that.
So there was no formal agreement?
No, as I said in my testimony, what I did is I withdrew from, and this was very important to do. Again, no precedent for this, as sitting President of New York Fed being nominated to be Secretary of the Treasury. And I withdrew from, after carefully consulting my colleagues, from involvement in monetary policy decisions. I did not go to the FOMC meeting in December, and I withdrew from all decisions about these individual cases involving the financial system and from day-to-day management. And that was the right thing to do at that time.
Thank you for clarifying that. Number two, a lot of people think that the President of the New York Fed works for the U.S. government. But in fact, you work for the private banks that elected you.
No, that is not true.
Can you provide, for the record, the names of the handful of bankers on the board of the New York Fed that elected you in 2003, please?
That is a matter of public record, and of course we can do that.
Thank you very much.
But, Congresswoman, can I just say, what you just said was not true. I work in the public interest. Officials of the Federal Reserve work for the public interest, and they work for the government.
But the people don't elect you. The heads of the Feds around the country don't elect you. It's the individuals who sit on the board of the New York Fed that elect you. Is that correct?
That's slightly more complicated than that. What the Congress did in setting up the Fed is set up a system where the presidents of the regional reserve banks are elected by their board, but it requires the approval of the chairman of the Board of Governors in Washington for them to serve. So it is a delicate balance of checks and balances, and Congress designed that system.
But it is largely private banks that elected you, and I would like you to provide that for the record, please.
Oh, absolutely. That's a matter of public record.
The Cleveland Fed is not equal to the New York Fed, so I'm very interested in your answer to the record. Number three. Goldman Sachs was the largest domestic recipient of funds in this AIG counterparty arrangement. Let me ask you, now as Treasury Secretary, your Chief of Staff is the gatekeeper for access to you. Could you please provide his name?
His name is Mark Patterson.
Thank you. And for whom did he work before you selected him as your Chief of Staff?
He worked for the President's transition team.
No, before that. Which Wall Street firm did he work for?
Before that, again, this is a matter of public record, and you know the answer to this question. He worked for Goldman Sachs. But
thank you very much. You answered my question, Mr. Secretary. Now let me say this: the AIG transaction. You have answered the question.
No,
you've answered the question. Thank you. The AIG transaction was disturbing to many observers. Why did our government not require the bank creditors to take the lead and bear some of the cost in any plan to stabilize AIG? You, in effect, nationalized the company and let the bank creditors off the hook. Why did you, as president of the New York Fed, not work out an arrangement to remove the London unit from the company rather than allowing the unit to infect the entire company?
If we had had the types of bankruptcy procedures we have for banks, it is possible that ultimately we could have done that. And if it would have been easy and cheaper for the taxpayer for us to separate the riskiest parts of the firm from the healthy, profitable insurance companies, we would do that. And in fact, that is the core of the restructuring strategy the company is now undertaking. But that choice was not available to us at the time. If it had been possible, of course we would have done that. But because we did not have the tools that we have under bankruptcy, we did not have that choice.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your phone logs from the subpoenaed material this committee requested, which I would like to insert in the record, show between September 14th and November 26th. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The critical period when the bailout occurred, and just after September 15th, when the three major rating agencies downgraded AIG's credit rating, you made hundreds of calls, and the most, over 225, to Secretary Paulson, who was then Secretary of Treasury. What firm did he work for prior to his appointment as Secretary of Treasury?
He worked for Goldman Sachs.
He worked for Goldman Sachs. Now, Goldman Sachs, as I understand it, got the most in counterparty payments of any domestic institution. Is that true, $14 billion? I
actually don't know if it's that true, but that's a matter of public record.
Societe Generale got the most from an international firm, but Goldman Sachs was number one. Now, you made about 100 calls to Fed Chair Ben Bernanke, but then the next highest number of calls in that period, you made 103 to a man named Dan Jester. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll end. May I just ask, what firm did he work for?
He worked, as you know, he worked for Goldman Sachs.
Thank you, and I will have additional questions with regard to who you phoned, and we will place that in the record. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say one thing in response to this? I just want to say it's very important. Congressman, you were suggesting that the people that were involved in this were not acting in the public interest, and you were suggesting that they were working for the private interest, not the public interest. And that is not true. I would never, and I believe none of those individuals would be ever part of any decision like that. And I think these people were people of enormous integrity and experience operating under exceptional circumstances with no precedent, doing the best they could for what was in the public interest. And I think it's important to say for the record.
I must move.